They didn't even knock. One morning, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws and bulldozers. And just like that, my grandfather's cabin, the one he hand-built in the 60s, was reduced to a pile of splintered wood and broken memories. I stood there, barefoot in the dirt, coffee mug still in hand, stunned. No warning, no paperwork, just destruction. The HOA president, a smug man named Greg in his usual salmon pink polo and boat shoes, walked right past me like I was invisible. "We've finally cleared that eyesore," he barked to a group of clipboard-carrying minions. "Now we can start the lake path." The lake path, that's what they called it. A winding little concrete sidewalk meant for residents to stroll around the water and sip wine while pretending they're part of some exclusive lakeside club. What they destroyed was my family's history. A quiet handcrafted cabin tucked away in the trees just a few feet from the water's edge. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. More importantly, it was private land. Land that belonged to me. See, here's what Greg and the HOA board didn't know. I owned the shoreline. Every inch of it. They assumed the lake was public, or at least controlled by the HOA. They were wrong. Dead wrong. And tearing down my cabin without so much as a conversation was going to cost them everything, including their precious clubhouse. Let me back up a bit. I moved to this lakeside community about 2 years ago after inheriting the cabin from my grandfather. The property had been in our family for generations, long before any HOA was even a thought. Back in the 1960s, the land was subdivided into residential lots, but my grandfather managed to purchase a long, narrow strip of land that ran along the lakefront, about 1.2 acres in total. That strip wrapped around almost half the lake's edge. Nobody paid it much attention back then. It wasn't considered buildable because of zoning regulations, and people assumed it was just part of the lake's natural buffer zone. But my grandfather knew better. He made sure it was properly recorded with boundaries etched into county records and taxes paid like clockwork. He even had a small dock built and kept a rowboat tied up year-round. It was simple, but it was ours. When I moved in, the cabin was still in great shape. I put in some work, new windows, a roof repair, a fresh coat of paint, but I kept its rustic charm. I wasn't looking to turn it into a mansion. I just wanted peace, nature, and a connection to the memories I had of summer spent fishing with Grandpa. But apparently, peace wasn't part of the HOA's master plan. From the beginning, Greg and his crew didn't like me. Maybe it was because I wasn't flashy. Maybe because I didn't go to their wine tastings or HOA meetings. Maybe it was because I had long hair and drove an old pickup. Whatever it was, they treated me like I didn't belong, even though I'd never violated a single community rule. Then came the beautification project. At the next HOA meeting, which I reluctantly attended, Greg announced that the board had approved a lakefront path complete with benches, lights, and a tiny wooden footbridge. "It'll increase property values for everyone," he said with a grin. That didn't reach his eyes. "And make the lake more accessible." I raised my hand. "What about my property?" I asked. Greg gave me a dismissive wave. "The community's property? You mean no?" I said firmly. "My property? I own that strip." The room fell awkwardly silent. Greg chuckled. "You might want to check the maps again, buddy." But I had already checked the maps. Not only did I have the deed, but I also had updated county records, surveys, and title insurance. My ownership was solid. I sent the board a copy of everything the next day, certified mail just to make sure. No one responded. 2 weeks later, I came home to see orange spray paint on the trees, lining my land. Then came the stakes and flags. I sent another letter. No response. Then came the demolition crew. After the cabin came down, I spent a day sitting on the pile of broken wood, trying to breathe, trying not to explode. The audacity, the arrogance, it made my blood boil. But I didn't yell. I didn't fight them in the street. Instead, I called my lawyer. Now, I don't play games when it comes to property rights. I had a land use attorney by the end of the week, and within days, we filed a cease and desist. We also began preparing a lawsuit. Trespassing, destruction of private property, and violation of state land use laws. The initial estimate of damages was around $210,000, including the cost to rebuild emotional distress and legal fees. Still, Greg and the HOA acted like they were untouchable. They held another meeting, called me a troublemaker, and told residents I was lying about the ownership. So, I decided it was time to go nuclear. What they didn't realize is that their Entire lakeside clubhouse, complete with a pool, boat slips, and event space was partially built on my land. Back in the 90s, the HOA expanded the clubhouse and built a new dock system, but they never got proper land surveys. They just assumed the shoreline was community property. That assumption was about to cost them dearly. My lawyer sent an official notice. The HOA had 30 days to vacate the portion of the land and water access they had illegally occupied or face legal consequences. Greg came to my property in person after that. First time he'd looked me in the eye since the demolition. "You're making a mistake," he said, his arms crossed tight across his chest. "No," I replied calmly. "You did, and now you're going to pay for it." He tried to negotiate. "We can offer you compensation. Maybe a small settlement, $5,000. I laughed in his face. "Try $200,000. And maybe I'll let your clubhouse stay." They didn't believe me. They thought I was bluffing, so I followed through. My attorney filed an injunction to block all further construction on the lake path and a separate suit demanding that the HOA remove all structures that infringed on my land. That included the dock, the back patio of the clubhouse, and several footpaths. The court granted the injunction almost immediately. Suddenly, the hose beautification project ground to a halt. Contractors pulled out. Residents started asking questions. Greg tried to downplay it, but the truth came out quick. When the local newspaper picked up the story, the headline was brutal. HOA destroys cabin on private land. Faces lawsuit over clubhouse. People were pissed. I started getting phone calls from residents, some angry at me, some apologizing, many just confused. I stayed calm, explaining that this was about property rights, not revenge. I just wanted justice, and to make sure this never happened to anyone else. Then came the kicker. During discovery, we uncovered internal HOA emails, some between Greg and board members that openly acknowledged they weren't sure who owned the land, but moved forward anyway. One email even said, "Let's deal with it later if he makes a fuss." That was the smoking gun. The judge scheduled a preliminary hearing, and Greg suddenly changed his tune. Their lawyer reached out, begging to settle. Here was my offer. 1. Full reimbursement for the cabin estimated at $160,000, including sentimental loss. 2. Public written apology from the HOA to be distributed to all community members. 3. Relinquishment of the clubhouse and dock areas that crossed onto my land for $50,000 donation from the HOA to a land preservation charity in my grandfather's name. They had 48 hours to accept. Greg tried to push back. I didn't budge. They accepted with 5 hours to spare. And that's how I ended up owning not only the shoreline, but half the clubhouse. After the deal was finalized, I had their dock dismantled, the patio fence removed, and I posted fresh private property signs all along my land. I rebuilt the cabin too, this time a little bigger with security cameras and floodlights. Funny thing is, now that the HOA knows I own the shoreline, they're treating me like royalty. Greg mysteriously resigned and moved out a month later. The new board president sent me a fruit basket and an invite to the next meeting. I didn't go. I don't need their approval. I've got my cabin, my peace, and my family's legacy intact. And every time I sip my coffee on the porch looking out over that quiet lake, I smile knowing the people who once tried to erase my history now have to ask permission to walk anywhere near it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking real-life tales. Your support helps us bring more unbelievable stories to life. Thanks for watching.